more general, rather than so-called teaching you guys how to do like web and mobile development. I kind of want to give you an evolution of how this space have moved over the years. Yeah, so this is my topic. We'll be going through the evolution of web and mobile development. A bit of introduction about myself. I'm a senior lecturer at the School of Computing. Yeah, so I teach various courses, mainly in the area of software engineering, analytics to various different levels, like undergraduates, graduates, and also working adults. Yeah, so I guess when we talk about web development, one of the major technology out there is JavaScript. And incidentally, JavaScript happens to be my first programming language that I learned. Yeah, I know for many of the new undergraduates, right, JavaScript and also Python is one of their first few programming languages. Yeah, but for me, there was actually a very funny story behind this. Yeah, so during the late 1990s, I kind of wanted to learn programming. Yeah, so I always have the interest in computers and IT in general. But during those days in the late 1990s, right, compilers are not exactly free. Yeah, so if you want to write a program and you want to like compile a program, right, you literally have to pay a company like Borland C++ or Visual Studio in order to actually be able to compile programs. Yeah, so it's unlike today where like the main focus is not so much about asking the users to pay for the compiler, but rather asking users to pay for software, right? During those days, right, the mentality is quite different. Yeah, so there isn't too much of open source culture also. Yeah, so we basically had to pay for it, and I mean I was like in my secondary school days. Hopefully it doesn't reveal my age. But during those days, I just wanted to learn programming in general. Yeah, and it turns out that JavaScript kind of allows me to write programs for free, essentially. So I could actually write the so-called program on the web browser without installing anything. Yeah, so it's actually free to use. For those who are in those age, right, you probably have heard about Netscape. Yeah, so during those times, those are the so-called popular browsers out there. Yeah, so that was actually a funny story. And with regards to mobile development, it's also a funny story in the sense that during 2008, I wanted to get a new phone. Yeah, I kind of wanted something a bit smarter than just a phone for calling purposes. Yeah, so I was eyeing on this Samsung Omnia, and I went to the store. I think it was StarHub or something. I can't remember the exact telco. Yeah, I've been switching around so much. I can't remember the exact telco. But it turns out that when I went to the store, when I was trying to get that phone, right, it was actually more expensive getting in the store compared to getting online. And those times are not like today where we have like Shopee, Lazada, where it's expected that online stuff is cheaper. Yeah, during those times, it's not something that you were expect. You wouldn't expect that getting from a Singtel website and a Singtel store, physical store, right, there's a big price difference. Yeah, so I wasn't too happy about this idea that getting the store itself is more expensive. So kind of got a different phone instead. Yeah, so I got iPhone instead, and I think it was the best decision. Yeah, so I think the ecosystem is a lot better, and went on to develop a number of apps to kind of enhance my own iPhone experience. Yeah, and I for those who have used iPhone in the good olden days, right, when it first released to Singapore, right, you realize that they don't have a lot of features. Yeah, they don't have things like they don't allow you to like count your data usage, your SMS usage, all these kind of things. iPhone did not have such features, but I kind of went on to enhance that for my own personal experience, just to enhance my own personal experience. Went on to release the app for free. That was the highlight of this whole journey. Had tens of thousands of users. It was a wonderful experience. Yeah, so being that time I just graduated for my basic degree, and the whole idea of a lot of users using your solution, I think is a fantastic idea. Of course, I got a lot of feedback after that. Users suggested that, can you work on this feature? I'm willing to pay for it. And the funny thing was that me being a geek, right, being a nerd, right, never thought of like making money out of all these things. Yeah. So, but anyway, just satisfy your customers, right, or just to make sure that you listen to their feedback, right. I went on to do out some features that they are requesting for it. I kind of make it a paid option, and was really jumping for joy when I received my first PayPal transaction. Yeah, so thought of my mind was like, oh, I didn't know you could make money this way. Yeah, that was a fantastic experience. Of course, I'm not getting any money from all these apps anymore, but I think that really jumpstart my whole entrepreneurship career in that sense. Yeah. And unlike today, right? During those days in the late the late 2000s, right? There's only just a handful of like mobile app developers in Singapore. You could literally count like you could literally name who are the developers out there. Yeah, there's like the developers for SG's bars, all this kind of thing. But nowadays, if you look at the space now, right? Actually almost a lot of like even primary school kids, right, can know how to create mobile apps. So if you are thinking about living this dream, like what I had experienced last time, my advice is probably it's not like that anymore. Yeah. So that's the whole context. But I think the whole point of me saying this story, right, is just to make sure I set the context right, so that later on when I give maybe like some advice or my views, right, you understand where it's coming from. Yeah. So a bit of background where this is coming from. Yeah. So with that, right, let me just walk through the topic of today's session. I'll run through this journey of the evolution of web development, how things have changed over the years. For those who are old enough, right, you probably have seen web pages that looks like this. Yeah, I still remember some of the first few web pages was created like this. Some of my first few web pages was like this. Of course, I was using this free web hosting service by GeoCities. Not too sure whether you all have heard about that before. But it looks like this. Yeah. So basically, it's a very informational kind of pages. It looks pretty much like a spam website kind of thing. Yeah. So if you are experienced with, I mean, if you are looking at your emails, right, sometimes your email look a bit like that. It feels like that. Yeah. So during those days, the so-called web development or web design, right, feels more like this. Yeah. So if you walk through the evolution of this space, right, of course, initially it was mainly in the form of like static pages, and you kind of transfer it onto FTP server, or you go on to the platform. They probably have a a file manager or a editor for you to copy and paste your HTML files. Yeah, so it used to be like that previously. And progressively it kind of move on to your dynamic pages. Yeah, so where you could incorporate like logic into pages so that you can load from a database, so and so forth. Yeah, so pages becomes no longer hard-coded in that sense, but more of dynamically change along the way. Okay, and along the way, of course, there's the emphasis on Web 2.0 where it's not exactly different from your dynamic pages, but then there's this emphasis on user-generated data. Yeah, so it's not just about the content creator, or not just about the website owner coming out with the content, but more of trying to encourage others to put in their own content, like YouTube. Then progressively, of course, there's this paradigm change where pages have now transformed into what we call web applications. Yeah, and that's also one of the highlight of one of the main point that I'm going through in this webinar. Yeah, you have things like your Google Docs. Of course, in those days, probably Google Docs wasn't that popular. Yeah. Then there's one period in time, right, where pretty much everything is so-called mobile app. There's a craze over mobile app. Yeah, so for those who are working in the government sector or in that space, right, you probably have heard about like PIC grant. Yeah, so where the government actually gives like I think 70% support. I think up to 70% support for companies to incorporate like technology. And one of the very common technology, so-called technology that is being incorporated is like use of like mobile app or iPad. Yeah, so if you go to various different restaurants, right, you see like iPad maybe go back in time like 10 years, yeah, or like 10 years or so, you see a lot of restaurants having iPad. Yeah, I think that's probably because of the government grant. Yeah, so everybody's jumping onto that, and everybody feel that it's a necessary things that we have mobile app. Yeah, then you start to realize that into this context right now, if you go to various different restaurants, right, you don't really see that many iPad solution anymore. Of course, you still see some of them like in your Hai Di Lao, your Artisan, you still see those, but largely speaking, many of the previous many of the restaurants that was previously using iPad have stopped using it. Yeah, I think one of the reason for this, one of the reasons why this is happening is because of the maintenance that comes together with it. Yeah, so the point I'm trying to drive at now, right, is that sometimes when you look at like mobile development, right, it's not just about getting the app out. It's not just that single effort of getting the app out, but it's that sustained consideration of maintenance. There's this sustain of like hardware can fail. Yeah, your iPad can fail along the way. Is it sustainable? Is it cost effective to do it that way? Yeah, hence that's why you see that progressively people are moving away from this whole idea that we have to have a mobile app. Yeah, personally, I feel that there's really no need to have a mobile app unless you have a use case that requires features of the mobile phone, like things like GPS, push notification, all this kind of thing. Yeah. So consequently, right, there's also this move towards like, oh, maybe let's not always think in terms of mobile app. Let's think in terms of how do we make our web application or web pages, right, responsive. Yeah. So that they are viewable, nicely viewable on the mobile device. Now that's when you have the responsive application, and progressively, of course, we still recognize the benefit of a mobile app. There is this like sense of belonging. It's not just a web page shown in a form of a mobile version, but more of that. There is this identity in there. Hence, there's also this idea of like a progressive web application, PWA. Yeah, so where it kind of gels the best of both worlds in some sense, that you want to give the experience like a mobile app, but you don't want to have that pain as what I mentioned just now, maintaining iPads, ensuring that you have mobile developers that can work on it all the time. Yeah, so I think that's one of the pain point. Of course, later on we'll discuss a bit more on that. Okay, but you can see based on my previous slide, right, there's this change in the trend where the previous thought is that those things that we are seeing are pages with interactivity. Yeah, but now when you look at all these things, right, they are more like applications running on a web browser. Yeah, it's like your Microsoft Word, instead of running on your desktop machine, now it's running on your web browser. Yeah, essentially, actually, that's what's happening. You have your Photoshop, you have your Microsoft Word, you have your instant messaging. They're all running on not just as a program, not just as an application, but rather on the web browser. Yeah, essentially, the gap between the idea of an application is now blurred. Yeah, it's no longer saying that it's a executable program that you need to install, those kind of things, but rather is this idea that you can run so-called programs even through the web. Yeah, that's essentially what I think what we mean by web applications. Okay, so as what I was saying, there's a perception change from a web design idea to a web development idea. Okay, but if you think about like developing web application in today's context, right, frankly speaking, that is actually not much different from developing desktop applications. Okay, in the sense that you even have like solutions out there, right, that allows you to use web technology to develop for desktop application. And I'm not talking about some very cool science project that people came up with just to show that it's something cool that it can be done, but it's not well received. Yeah, we're talking about like some of the popular desktop applications. So if you are a technical person, if you do like web development or you do like coding, right, you probably will be familiar with this software called Visual Studio Code. Yeah, and in my opinion, I think this is one of the probably the best editor out there. And this, by the way, is actually based on the Electron technology, meaning that it's actually written purely with a web development technology. And then you kind of convert it into a normal desktop application. And there you have it. Yeah, you basically have this idea of what I mentioned, that developing for so-called web application is actually not different from desktop application. You have this idea that if you need to create a desktop application, you don't really need to go and learn how to do desktop application programming purely just for desktop application programming. And that's I think one of the key point that I'm bringing across in this particular webinar. Okay, yeah, so with that, right, let me also give you some discussion with regards to the whole backend and front-end development space. In the traditional approach, we have our backend, our front-end, where the technology are tightly knitted. Yeah, so your backend, probably you have like Java EE, Java Enterprise Edition, and the front-end technology will be like things like your JSP, basically your dynamic pages, and you incorporate things like JavaScript into it. Yeah. Of course, pages are rendered on the server and then sent over to the client in the form of a HTML, and there you have it. Yeah. So your typical kind of like dynamic dynamic web kind of thing that I was talking about just now in the evolution slide. Yeah, but if you look at the modern development style, right, I think there's some flaw with this issue. Of course, many companies are still using this approach, but progressively, right, I think we recognize that this approach have a lot of consideration. One of the consideration is that there is this issue of tightly coupled concept. Yeah, so where your backend and front end is tightly knitted, and we all know that in the development world, right, when we talk about so-called full stack development, yeah, there is always these two major players out there. You have your backend developers and your front end developers, and when you have something that's so tightly knitted, right, it means that the backend developer and the front end developer have to talk to each other all the time in order to work well with each other. And I think if you talk about like development, right, that's actually a major concern. That's actually a major element of inefficiency. Hence, that's why in the modern programming style, there is this concept of like, oh, should we decouple these two types of developers such that they can focus on what they are supposed to be doing. Front-end developers focus on the front end, the UI of the pages, so on and so forth. The back-end developers focus on trying to provide a mechanism for the users to talk to the backend, the database, so on and so forth, and also incorporate some more logic in there. Hence, there's this idea of like RESTful API that's being used. Of course, if you look at some of the other services out there like Facebook, right, they have even moved further on to use like things like GraphQL instead of like RESTful API. But I don't think GraphQL is meant for every company. But the idea is still the same. Yeah, so you want to decouple these two types of developers so that there's better separation of concern. And the whole idea behind things is that you want your development process to be much more efficient in that sense. Yeah, and very much a lot of all these are all powered by Ajax. Okay, so for the rest of the discussion, I'll focus mainly on the front-end development side of things. Yeah, because I think when we talk about web development and we talk about mobile development, that tends to be closer to the front-end side of things. Okay, so unlike the back-end development, the changes over at front-end is very different. Yeah, the style is very different. Like I like to tell my students yeah, because I teach like students, undergraduate students, and many of them will end up to become like front-end developers, back-end developers, or full-stack developers. And sometimes they will ask for feedback saying that which one should I choose? Should I choose a front-end development or back-end development? And I will say that actually the advice is that if you are somebody that doesn't want cannot handle the amount of like changes, so much changes along the way, then backend development I think is a better approach. In the sense that if you look at backend development over the last few decades, right, things haven't changed that much. I mean, languages have arise, you have a slight new packages that's out there, but there isn't too much of a big change in the sense that the way how things are being done is still pretty much the same. Whereas for front end, right, things are very different. Yeah, you look at this picture over here, right? There's this word called JavaScript fatigue. You probably have heard about this term before. Yeah, basically this idea that you have like JavaScript framework that's coming out by the week. It's like every week there's a new JavaScript framework. If you are learning JavaScript development this way, if you are learning in a way that is all about trying to learn what is the latest trend of JavaScript development, right? Then I think you will get fatigue. You will definitely get fatigue. Yeah. But the nice thing about front-end development is that it's you get to touch it. Yeah, you get to feel it. It's something visual. Backend is a bit boring in that sense. Yeah, it's like behind the scenes kind of thing, a backstage kind of thing. So really depends on what is your interest. Yeah, but the point I'm trying to say over here is that because of the change in the rapid development in front-end development, right, the style of coding, right, have changed quite a bit along the way. Yeah, so if you look at the paradigm shift in the thinking of JavaScript development, right, you notice that people are sensing this fatigue, and people are trying to exploit this idea of JavaScript and taking it to the next level. Yeah, I think one of the best development in this area is this introduction of Node.js. Yeah, where JavaScript can be used for backend development. Yeah, so Node.js is basically like a technology that allows you to run JavaScript pretty much in a server context or on the desktop environment kind of thing. Yeah. So it's not just purely for like web pages. Yeah. So one of the key benefits, why I say it is one of the most in my opinion, one of the best invention is that because it now allows JavaScript to be used for both backend and front-end development. And why is this a big thing? It also means that whatever that you're using for your front end, your libraries that you're using for your front ends, right, can now be used for backend. Yeah, so you have your libraries like your cryptography libraries now can be used for backend also. Yeah, you don't need a special library for backend like your Java library, your Jar file for backend, and then you need to find a JavaScript equivalent for your front end. That's no longer the case. Yeah, if you are able to use Node.js, you can pretty much use the exact same library for both front end and back end. And the idea behind things and the cool things about this is that like what this title over here is trying to show, and what you see over at the bottom over here, this is your log of the ring, right? One ring to rule them all, right? Likewise over here, imagine you have this JavaScript, one language to rule them all. Yeah, developers no longer have to context switch between backend and front end programming languages. I don't know about you, but if you are programming long enough, right, you realize that you get better at you get more comfortable and you get better at coding in a particular language if you use it a lot. Yeah, like for me, I use JavaScript a lot. Nowadays sometimes I teach in Python also. But between Python and JavaScript, right, JavaScript always have a nicer attraction to me. I feel more comfortable with it. I generally the whole coding experience feels much better. Yeah, partly because of the editor or this kind of thing. Yeah, but the idea is that when you devote more time in it, right, you get better at it. And having this idea where there's one language for both backend and front end, right, also means that the developers don't need to think, oh, now I'm doing Java programming. Now I'm thinking, now I'm doing JavaScript programming. I need to change my programming style. Yeah, and I think that sometimes is very painful. That's why you look at like full stack developers, right? That it's very difficult for a full stack developer to say that today, this hour I'm working on backend, next hour I'm working on front end, next hour I'm working on backend, keep switching. You get very distracted in that sense. But now suppose that we have so-called one language JavaScript to rule them all, it means that they don't need to have this context switching. They don't need to have this like style switching action where it's like, oh, now I'm doing this programming language, I need to write things this way. Now I'm coding this language, I need to write things this way. Yeah, I think that's the way forward. That will make the whole process of development much more efficient. Okay, and of course, if you think in terms of just like web development, right? The trend has also changed quite a bit. Yeah. During like maybe 10 years back, a lot of times we are using like things like libraries, like jQuery, all this kind of thing. And a lot of times we will just link like URL or CDN onto the pages. But progressively in today's context, right, there is this more emphasis on using package manager. If you need a data table component, just go to your package manager, look for it, rather than looking for plugins and then embedding onto it. Yeah. So I think that's also what I mean by there's a change in the development style. And there's also a better emphasis on structuring your web application and the use of like more module bundler. Okay. And if you look at all these changes, right, it all points to what I mentioned just now. There's this concept where it's no longer about your pages, you put in JavaScript logic, but more of treating them as this is a software, and then I'm presenting it onto a web browser environment. Yeah, the whole concept of having modules, the whole concept of having things all packaged together as if it's like a executable file. Yeah, I think that's what we are looking at in today's context. We are looking at web development, not web designing. Yeah. Okay. And just to give you a bit of context of the modern style of doing web development, and this is I think one of the things that if you want to go far in your web development career, right, or journey, right, you need to kind of recognize. It's like we hear about like Angular, React, Vue.js, all this, right? But how is all this new framework different from the old way of doing things? Okay, so let me just run through how we normally do things in the old way. In the old way of doing things, right, we actually will handle the DOM manipulation ourselves. Yeah, so basically when you view a web page, right, the browser will pass the page and come out with a DOM tree of the page. And then what happens is that developers will then artificially manipulate the DOM tree, the components on the web page, just to give that effects. Like you have the things flying around, you have things like fading away, all this kind of thing, and removing of things, and then dynamically loading more content along the way. And this is what we mean by DOM manipulation. So you're artificially modifying the page elements so that the page becomes a bit more dynamic, rather than the olden days of click, it goes to load a page, click again, load a new page, that kind of thing. Okay. But in those days, right, developers actually have to handle the DOM manipulation themselves. Of course, jQuery makes life a lot easier. But the issue is that as the size of the web application becomes bigger and bigger, yeah, the effort of making changes to the DOM tree, right, becomes more and more challenging. To some point, I personally feel that it's quite impossible to do it. Yeah, if you want to do it exhaustively. Yeah, so in the long run, this is not a good trend. Yeah, if you are coming out with a small page, I think it's totally fine. But if you want to look at it in the long run, which later on I will use like Facebook as an example, you realize that it's not the way to go. Yeah, it's not the way to go. Developers will end up trying to deal with like DOM manipulation rather than think about like the business logic, the things that the companies want to incorporate onto their pages. Okay, so if you look at like modern framework, like things like React and Angular, Vue.js, all this, right? Basically, one of the value proposition that they are bringing across, right, is that they are saying that let's assume this responsibility of doing the DOM manipulation for you. Yeah, you don't have to do it anymore. Instead, I'll do it for you. Yeah, so developers do not have to exhaustively take note of the events that will lead to DOM tree changes. They don't have to deal with DOM tree. Yeah, and it also invited a new idea of like doing development, this decorative style of coding. Yeah, it's like what happens when we are dealing with like database. You write like SQL statement says that select star from table, give me all the data. You don't care how the data is being retrieved. You just say that I issue this command, you give me what I want. Whether you need to do like query optimization, I leave it up to you. And that's exactly what's happening over here. The developers will now tell the framework saying that I want the content to be rendered this way. If there's changes in the data for any reason, please do it for me. Yeah, so the framework will take care of the rendering and re-rendering when there's a change in the data. Yeah, this change could be due to somebody doing something, or me doing something, or there's a change in the database or whatnot. Yeah, so if you take a look at Facebook as an example, right, why is this important? Yeah, so if this, by the way, is like my Facebook page. Yeah, so I'm still in that age where we're still using Facebook. I know the younger generation probably they use like Instagram, maybe Snapchat, TikTok. Yeah, so yeah, but anyway, Facebook, you look at Facebook over here, right, you can see that there are many places where things can change. Yeah, you have here your notification, you have your number of likes, number of comments, number of reactions, number of comments, number of shares over here. So if I'm typing a comment over here, let's say I comment, right, and then when I'm typing the comment that time, right, there's a new comment that comes in, right, by right, this comment count should be incremented accordingly. Yeah, so then that's one possible like event that will lead to this thing. So if you're talking about like in the olden days of doing things, right, this will mean that the developers have to anticipate. Oh, if the user is typing the comment and there's a new share that happened, right, I need to make sure that I take note of that situation and I update this accordingly. You realize that too many situations that pops up. Yeah, you're typing this comment, and then the like count over here changes. Too many places to deal with. Yeah, so pretty much what I'm trying to say is that it's impossible to exhaustively anticipate every possible event. Yeah, you don't want the developers to be dealing with all this kind of thing. Oh, anticipating that there's this change over here. Yeah, and we need to understand that in a Facebook development team, right, it's not just one person doing the development. You have a team of developers, and different teams are working on new features. Some of the features you don't even know until it's being released out for public use. Yeah, so you can't anticipate every possible events. And that's also the reason why Facebook actually introduced this framework called React. It's just to address this concern that can we still allow progress in the whole development process, and then still ensure that features can be rolled out and not hindered by all this kind of consideration. Okay, so how does it work? Yeah, so when I talk about declarative way of doing things, how does it work? Okay, so the way how it works is that the developers will specify the data that needs to be rendered. Yeah, then they will probably also specify how to render one piece of the record. And then each time when there's an event that leads to changes, maybe somebody add a new comment, somebody shared, somebody add a reaction, this timing change, all this kind of thing, right? The framework will recognize that there's a need to re-render, and they will take care of the re-rendering for you. Yeah, you no longer have to write those re-rendering. You basically just, the framework will automatically re-render for you. Yeah, so this also means that it's very fast. Yeah, the re-rendering is very fast, that there isn't too much of unnecessary re-rendering, and developers only need to declare how the page should look like rather than handle the rendering logic themselves. And I can tell you that this really save a lot of time. Yeah. Okay. So and consequently, right, because of this thought process, right, there's also one thing that Facebook probably have not tell you is that if you're running Facebook, right, Facebook have a lot of users. Yeah, I think the population of Facebook, right, is probably more than, okay, it's not probably, the population of Facebook, right, is much more than many of the population of the different countries combined. Yeah, so what we are saying is that Facebook are not charging their users to use their services, but each time when you go to Facebook and you log in, right, you're actually consuming their resources. If you are Facebook, right, and you don't have a revenue generation mechanism, right, you will literally run you dry. Yeah, you literally run you dry. So Facebook literally, they are actually literally upgrading their hardware by the day. Yeah, so you have like people going there to install hard disks every day. Yeah, you have like new compute unit that is being provisioned every day, kind of thing. Yeah, so if you think in that sense, right, they have this urgency to see how to reduce costs. And it turns out that this way of doing things, right, and this whole mindset of like application rather than web page, right, this whole idea that it's no longer about I sending you the web page, right, but more of you loading a application, a web-based application and then you getting the data from me, right, actually kind of make life easier for them. Actually make it better for them in the sense that now they can delegate some of the computation effort, right, to you instead. Yeah, rather than them doing the computation. Yeah, so which also give rise to this idea of a fat client instead of a thin client. Yeah, so meaning that the client actually do quite a lot of work. That means your web browser actually do a lot of computation. Yeah, it's very different from the way how things are being done in like 20 years ago. Yeah, 20 years ago, you go to a page, you download page, and then load. The web browser don't need to do any single thing, no computation. Some of the JavaScript that you do is like maybe pop out a message, that kind of thing, not anything that's fantastic. Yeah, but today we have very powerful devices. You have your iPhone, right, or you have your smartphones, right? That's powerful enough compared to like the computers 20 years ago. So why not ask your users to do it? Yeah, and what do the backend, what do the server do? The server will handle the data storage, the security, and hopefully as little computation as possible. Yeah, and that's exactly the whole change in mindset, and that's some of the major changes along the way. And of course, by having this idea, right, it becomes much more scalable and it's much economical to actually run in the long run for Facebook and also for major companies out there. Okay, so let's now move to like mobile development. Let's take a look at mobile development. So in terms of mobile development, generally there's three types of way of doing mobile apps. Yeah, you have the traditional way, which is your native app written in things like Objective-C. Like when I was coding my app, right, in the 2008, right, that time, right, it was using like Objective-C. And during those time, actually, even Objective-C, right, is very primitive. We have to do things like memory management ourselves. So it's not like nowadays you just write and then memory management is all handled automatically. It's not like that. Yeah. So but that was actually the main way of creating mobile app. Yeah, of course you also have Android. But now you do see a lot of other technologies out there. You have like your web application created in a responsive interface, like that looks like a mobile app, but it's actually a web app. You also have things like hybrid app, like where they basically embed a web view onto the app to power the entire thing, pretty much like a web app, just that it's placed in a mobile app. Yeah, essentially it's not much different from a web app, except that you do have an icon onto your screen. Okay. But in terms of the mobile, in terms of the native side of things, right? One of the cool things I think that is very interesting, and I think it's a good idea is this thing called compilation to native app using web technology. Yeah, and over here, React Native is one of those that allows you to do that. So basically, the idea is what? The idea is that you will write your codes pretty much in a so-called web development style of coding, but then when you compile that time, right, it's compiled natively. Yeah, compiled natively into your native component, and it runs like a normal native app. Yeah, so how is this different from embedding a web view, like in the case of Ionic, right? Is that in the case of Ionic, right, or in the case of hybrid app, right, it's more like putting a web view and you showing the web page onto the web view. But whereas for this, right, this is more like trying to translate your codes, right, your codes written in web development, right, into native component. So the speed, right, is actually much faster. Yeah, so if you think in terms of like the speed, right, it's actually much faster. Yeah, so that's actually something that I thought it was quite cool. But later on in the next slide, I'll show you what I mean by that in more detail. But my take on this, yeah. So if you look at these three ways of doing web development, and based on my background, where I come from a mobile app development background, where I was using like native app. Yeah. So now if you ask what's my take on mobile development, I'll still say that I will not choose native app development as the first choice. Yeah, that in my opinion, I don't think that should be the first choice. Because as what I have alluded to, right, is that development of that so-called app, right, that means that version of the app, right, is just one part of the puzzle, of the equation. Yeah. you need to cater for multiple platforms. Yeah, so it's not just iOS. You need to cater for like Android. In olden days, we have like BlackBerry, all this kind of thing. I think one of the most painful thing that comes together with it, right, is more of the maintenance. Yeah, and that is actually a major concern. Yeah, and you're looking at like companies out there which was previously using iPad, and restaurants that are using iPad and are not using iPad anymore. Why? Because the PIC grant has run out. They find it very difficult to hire mobile developers to develop for them anymore. It is no longer economical to actually do that anymore. There isn't any government grant. So why not fall back to just the paper way of doing things? Yeah, that's why you can see that progressively, many of them are not using iPad anymore. Yeah, so maintenance, getting people to come out with the next version is actually a real concern. Yeah, and not even just the different versions. If you're just talking about like, I need to maintain one version for iOS, I need to maintain one version for Android, right? It's actually very painful. Yeah. To a company, it means that you need to hire two different kind of developers. If you are doing outsourcing, right, you need to get the outsourcing company, probably two different outsourcing company to develop two different apps for you. And the cost is what? The cost is probably almost twice the cost for developing one. Yeah, so it's very painful for the company in that sense. Yeah. So why do I advocate like things like React Native? Yeah. So React Native, I want to reiterate, is basically a technology that allows you to use a web-based development approach to develop mobile app. Of course, as what the name suggests, right, this is in a way based in React. Yeah. So that means if you are a React developer, right, it's very easy for you to pick up React Native. Yeah, because the style, the coding way is similar. Yeah, it kind of allows you to compile your app to native component, so the performance is a lot faster than your hybrid app. Of course, I don't think it's on par to the level of native app, but it's close. Yeah. If you give me a React Native app and I look at a native app and I compare it side by side, for most users, right, they cannot tell the difference. But of course, if you ask me, do I know how to, can I see a difference? Of course, I can tell the difference. Yeah, by the way, how when you press on the buttons, how it looks like, you can sense it. But is it really that important to be so particular about such things? Yeah, because the general public doesn't know about such things, and then that's exactly the point I'm trying to drive at over here. That sometimes native app development, right, I don't think that's the way to go because of some of the issues that I talk about over here. Yeah, you need to maintain different code base. You need to make sure that different versions, you have a new version for it, a new code for it. There's a new firmware, you need to tackle it, so on and so forth. If you can not care about such thing and you can say that let's just focus purely on the development rather than dealing with like new versions, dealing with different platforms, right? That would be very fantastic. And that in my opinion, I feel that React Native is one of those that allows you to achieve that. Yeah, so it basically allows you to reuse your codes as much as possible to the extent that you could even reuse your web application code base. Yeah. So now instead of having to have one version for web, one version for mobile, you could even say that this tool, right, is actually can be reused. So the effort, right, is not two times the effort, but maybe like 1.5 times the effort. And so generally speaking, it makes the maintenance much easily. Yeah. Okay, so some takeaway points. Okay, I'm a bit running out of time, so I'll go a bit faster. So some takeaway points, right? It basically allows the developers to focus on the business logic rather than both the business logic and rendering logic. And when you're thinking in terms of getting the app out, right, there's a lot of consideration, maintenance of the code base in the long run. What are the development languages that the team is using? If I need to find a replacement developer, can I ask the backend developer to become a front end and vice versa? If you can do that, that will be very fantastic, right? Yeah. And of course, if you can code everything in JavaScript, right, both your backend, front end, desktop, your mobile app, even your IoT devices, right, I would think that we can be a lot more productive in that sense. Okay? And I feel that in order to, the answer to this, right, is actually the React ecosystem kind of address many of all these considerations. Yeah, and